Hello everyone, this is podcast number 3. My guest today, I came across him a few years ago. He was a poker coach at Run It Once. He was making thought-provoking videos. He had a great blog on the site where he shared his thoughts on poker and life. Now he runs one of the most successful coaching projects in the business. His name is Nick Howard. And I'm very happy to have you on, Nick.
What's up, guys? Happy to be here.
So prior to the podcast, we talked shortly, and I think you're in Brazil right now. How do you like Brazil, and how's the tournament going? You're competing in.
Yeah, I'm just at an Airbnb right now. Brazil's hotter than I expected for this time of year. The tournament venue is extremely nice. Just for what I guess I was expecting. And a lot of my students are here from just having connected with guys through the community, mainly Run It Once from my earlier years. So these are guys that I've known for a few years from when I first started posting on that blog. And it's finally my first time meeting them, which is kind of a really cool experience.
So are you still in, I think you entered the Heads Up tournament. Are you still in the... Did you make
Busted the heads up. Won round 1, lost round 2. I'm going to play the main event today, all things considered. And by that, I mean, if I can get money out of the Brazilian ATMs, I will be in this tournament. Otherwise, I'm going to be begging in the lobby for someone to lend me. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I wish you a lot of luck in the tournament. And are you traveling all the time at the moment, or do you have a base where you play online poker?
Since summer, I have been basically remote. Most of my students are scattered through Europe, and I made a promise to these Brazilian guys that I would come see them earlier this year, and we were just on a random call. We were actually filming a video, a lesson video, and the video went so well that I was like, guys, we got to meet. And I'm like, just tell me where. And they're like, come to BSOP Brazil. It's these dates. And I was like, okay, just consider it done. So I've had it on my calendar, and I kept looking at it like, am I really going to do this? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. So I'm here, and I'll probably make my way back up towards the States after this, but I'm here for another week or so.
I've wanted to talk to you actually for quite a while, and I've sent you some emails, and I've never got an answer from you.
No way. I'll have to scold my second in command because I don't check that inbox. But let's go. We're here. What do you want to talk about? I got 700 things that I could fill time with, and I hope I can keep this to a half hour because I struggle with very short talks. But let's get into it.
First, I would like to know how did you get into poker? And knowing your story, you struggled for a long time to get poker right. Can you share your story, how you started until that point where you hit rock bottom and decided I have to make something different, to do something different?
Sure. I'll do the super accelerated version of this. Got into poker when I was 18, second child syndrome, very rebellious, trying to prove myself through games, which I intro with this because it's sort of my gift and my curse, I think, and it's what gave me all the ambition. But unfortunately, it also led to me having a personality type, a profile type, I guess is a better way to put it for poker players, that compensated heavily. I was over-aggressive always through my career. I had a lot of trouble trying to keep my emotions in check in terms of control, always trying to control the hand, control the pot. And this led me to discover theory because I sort of saw it as the way to simplify, well, I wouldn't say simplify, but a way to have me gain a little bit more stability over my my mindset issues. If I can just commit to an approach that seems like it's safe, because theory was the solution, GTO was the solution, then everything would fall into place. So this led me down another 5-year rabbit hole. I discovered theory with Matt Janda, sort of when he was the godfather of the GTO era, around 22. Took that all the way, pretty much until I actually got my job through Run It Once from a recommendation from Matt. And I had decent success over these years, but I always had the feeling inside like, like I was white knuckling my career almost. Like it could fall apart at any time because I was holding things together through such a vulnerable framework. And if I lost the ability to organize all this information that I had gained in my head, that I was as weak as the day that I started. So GTO was probably the way that my career recovered at 22, but also what accelerated my burnout around 27, 28. I had been making videos for Run It Once, and I was in a community where GTO was the thing. And I was surrounded by guys that were a lot smarter than me. Ben Solsky, Tyler Forrester. These were the guys that were really pioneering sort of the GTO train at the time. So I was learning a lot from them, just watching, listening a lot, but also trying to have my own take on this, trying to establish myself in that community because I was still compensating heavily in a way. I wanted to be recognized. I wanted to be doing something new that was provocative in a type of way and worth listening to. And it got to the point where I was relatively happy with, my collection of training content, but it didn't feel authentic to me. It felt like it was an act almost that I was putting on. It's funny, I've never spoken about it in this type of way, but that's what it really felt like. It was almost like I was hunting on a philosophy or a way of being that was more authentic to me. I hadn't really contacted who I was yet. And this resulted in me having a pretty severe burnout period where I just couldn't continue to wear the mask of GTO, and I couldn't continue to organize all of the information daily and try to protect myself with a system that at the core of me just didn't feel incentivized. Something was wrong with it. And my results weren't great. They were winning, but as a high performance DNA, which I feel like I've always had that sort of that DNA of a high performer. And for high performers out there, I think they know what I'm talking about. You're always pushing yourself to like the next limit. And I had plateaued for a while. So I couldn't play for a while. I hit this rock bottom experience. And I specifically remember because I was with a girlfriend at the time who we were both working quite a bit, trying to pay rent. And she was working late. I was in bed, probably I should have been playing poker. I remember I had my backer texting me like, I need you to put in more volume. Games are good. I was playing an Ignition at the time, which at that time was Bovada. And I remember staring up at my ceiling in bed. I hadn't played a hand in at least a week, I think, contemplating everything about life. And I remember knowing I'm not done with this yet. I was trying to figure out, is this the end of my career? And this voice kept saying, you're not done yet. And I remember throwing up this prayer, which for me was not customary for me to be, on my knees begging to a God that I'm not even sure I believe in. And I remember specifically, I said, you got to give me something because I can't figure this out on my own. I was humble enough to admit that I can't figure out what the next step is. And I knew that I wanted to create this bridge. I kept thinking like, fast forward, if I ever come out of this, if I manage to come out of this promise that I'll make with myself and whoever the hell I'm speaking to up there, I promise I will commit myself to building a bridge to alleviate the unnecessary suffering of others who are going through the same thing. And I almost made this like my prayer at the time, where and somehow in the next week, 2 weeks, month, I started to just have different types of thoughts come into my intuition that I decided, you know what? If I'm going to continue with the humility train, I'm going to follow these and see where they take me. And a new methodology opened up. And 2-3 years later, it spun into what is Pokerdetox. And I've told guys recently on this trip, because a lot of the questions I get is, what motivates you to do all of the type of Q&As that you do with the community? I've sort of coined myself as the high stakes coach that's connected to the low stakes struggle. I think that's my position of the industry. Is I never sort of left that behind. I'm sort of trying to perfect the bridge so that small stakes players can scale to high stakes as efficiently as possible. And people constantly ask me, where does that motivation come from to do that? And I constantly go back to this experience that I had in my room that night where it was like, I feel like I made a promise with someone, something, whether or not it's myself or whether or not it's some version of my higher self. But a lot of the information that I think I've gained access to on this journey, whether or not it was because I set an intention and then created that reality, or whether or not I'm actually channeling some sort of methodology from above, like I really feel like I have a duty or an obligation almost to make sure that this bridge gets built, more or less. And I don't know when that's going to end. But I do a lot of listening these days because the students are the best ones to tell you how to refine the bridge. And every single time I do another phone call with new guys, or I send a new flight of students through the training program, the result is constantly that they make it better. So I'm here for the foreseeable near future, trying to perfect the imperfectible.
How did you make the change when you made the prayer? Did you get around new people who gave you new ideas? How did you make the change too?
Well, no, this was the most isolating and lonely part of it, was that everything that I had access to was GTO oriented. I was part of the Run It Once community, which at the time was just really submerged in like fundamentalism GTO. And I use that term because I've been sort of relating the GTO trap as almost like a GTO dogma. I almost see like people who still talk about GTO are very much like religious fundamentalists in a sense. It's like literally, this is GTO. This is how it is. And I think Ben Solsky was the first one to sort of try to pry open that can of worms and say, hey guys, like we got to stop calling GTO. Let's talk about it in terms of like well-balanced strategies. And then that was a very big step in the right direction, I think, but it sort of fell on deaf ears. And that happened maybe like a year into the GTO trap, but I digress. The thing that I did immediately after that rock bottom night was I unhooked off the community. I don't remember exactly how long I took off, but my approach became very personal. I had this one thing that I had access to, which was that I had clairvoyant hole cards on Bovada. In other words, if guys who played on Bovada, and I think it's still like this, you could request the hand histories and see the guy's hole cards after the fact.
You could see your opponent's hole
within
card.
24 hours. Yeah, they would reveal the opponent's hole cards. And so I started to try to take advantage of this and say, okay, let's assume there's something that I'm not seeing. Let's assume that there's a massive room for improvement. This was the first assumption, and I think it's always a healthy assumption. Let's look at these hole cards and see where the hell most of my money seems to be going when people don't have a better hand than me. It was like very simple how I started. And I began to see that what was happening in a very overarching sense was I was folding a lot of money away versus people who had a worse hand. And it was happening all over the game tree. I was getting bluffed more than I thought, quite simply. And I started to just pay attention to what spots this was happening the most. And I started to just make very simple adjustments to my game that were very raw in the sense that they weren't like calculated, other than just being frustrated with the fact that people were apparently bluffing me in these pots. And the adjustments I made, although that they were pretty basic, started to work. And I think this was part of me getting lucky, was I got positive confirmation bias off the bat. I ran bad, maybe I never would be speaking to you right now. Maybe I would have quit. But the initial things that I did that I thought were good and that turned out to be correct for the state of the games, they started working right off the bat. And I started getting results. And it gave me enough confidence to actually start to have a voice. With a few months of success and good results on Ignition, I think I took back to the blogs. It might have even been before I actually had really good results that I started just making vulnerable posts. I started that blog as a experiment almost. I wanted to see how many people resonated with the type of suffering I was going through. Because up until then, I had just been like wondering if I'm different in some way. Like, is there something just fundamentally wrong with me that I feel all of this resistance inside as a poker player, feeling like I'm just not enough yet? And yet no one else seems to be talking about it as if it's as much of a crisis as I feel like it is. Almost like on an existential level was the level of seriousness that I felt this, because I was so identified with my career. And so my blog was an experiment to see, okay, if I start talking about this in a very personal, vulnerable way, are people going to resonate with it? It was also a way for me to hold myself accountable to new habits that I wanted to instill. So when I would write a blog post, and most of the guys remember my blog as like one that was very inspiring because I was representing a figure that people wanted to be more like, I think. But the funny thing was I wasn't even fully that guy yet. I would write a post and I'd be like, okay, I have this idea in my head, or I did this for 1 or 2 days. This is really the type of guy I want to be. I write this post and I would feel it from like a higher level of my potential. And in something about writing that post held me accountable to becoming that version of myself.
Kind of like the fake it until you make it.
In the strangest, I would say in the healthiest way, because it was like I was playing both ends of it. I was vulnerable. Half of my posts were really vulnerable. Like, guys, I'm suffering deeply. And then half of my posts were like, and here's the new me. Here's something to aspire to. Here's a version of a poker player that feels honorable and true. And so I was playing both ends of it, which felt like it gave it a humble balance. But it would be funny for people to realize that, like, very much when the day that I would post a blog entry, I'm probably fronting on that post. I'm probably not that guy that you think I am yet. But I made it my mission to, like, once I made that post, it was like the thing that held me the most accountable. So if an opportunity came up to live up to the version that I portrayed myself as in that blog post, I'd be like, no, I'm not doubling back on this. I'm that guy now. And I kept stacking these belief systems and these perspectives and just these a new way of being for myself that I could respect more. And I did that enough that I feel like I had a pretty big transformation in those 2 years. So the blog was a catalyst for me. Catalyst to both document my experience, test the waters for who else was going through the same type of thing. I joked with a lot of the guys who responded to that blog in the early years that I was basically trying to find my tribe. It's basically trying to probe into the industry to see who the hell is human enough to relate to me on this level, because I'm taking this thing very seriously. This isn't a hobby for me. And my life depends on it in the most direct sense. Like, I didn't have another job. My life depended on this. The people that were closest to me depended on me succeeding. So it became a very spiritual journey for me. And I didn't know this when I threw that prayer up that night, but the whole thing became deeply spiritual because it was going to the core of all of the belief systems that I didn't want to look at. And so I think I'm known in the industry these days as like someone who's very intense and serious. But I was saying the other day to a friend that I think if people knew the context of the experience I went through, I don't know if I would be labeled as serious as I am, because I think I'm rather jolly for the type of shit that I went through at my rock bottom experience. It could have gone south. It could have been way worse. And I'm grateful that it seems like I spun out of it, and my approach on everything is more the resourceful approach. I think I am very intense and serious, but I want to stand for something that shows people that there is a resource available if you are suffering in this type of way. And I think the first step of a lot of that process is awareness being raised around it, that other people have gone through what you're going through, and creating an efficient bridge, because I don't want to see unnecessary suffering in the industry. It's the thing that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, you could spin this a few different ways and say, Nick, would you ever have had the success that you had if you didn't go through the rock bottom experience? And, who's to say, really? But I truly believe that whether or not you want to say years of my 20s were wasted or it was all in divine timing, it was a type of thing that if I just had a better teacher earlier on, someone showing me a more efficient path, I know I could have learned the most valuable lessons faster. And so that's what's really important to me, is like, I want to be able to teach guys the most important lessons fast, because from where I'm sitting right now, there's more important lessons to learn. If you spend your whole life trying to learn the poker lesson, you miss out on being able to apply that one lesson to a larger framework of your life. There's so many other ways that you can take the lessons you learn from poker and the humility that you gain and apply it to real life. And so
what are other things you're really interested in right now?
One of the things that I've started to look at a lot, just in terms of taking poker to a wider scale and just understanding the macro of things more. I love to just look at how industries work, how the model of an industry works, how the model of a marketplace looks. And where I used to look at that from a strategy oriented perspective, a competitive perspective of how do we find the imbalances and exploit. Now I look at it from much more of a non-zero sum game perspective, cooperative perspective. So not so much as a player anymore trying to prove himself competitively, but from almost like a philosopher standpoint of how do we get the market to a place of balance, or more importantly, what is stopping the market from adopting the types of strategies in their learning approach that would have them move toward equilibrium much faster? Because we have to admit that the market is highly imbalanced. And I don't just mean that people are playing dynamic exploitative strategies trying to counter each other constantly. I mean, people are stuck trying to apply strategies that fundamentally don't make sense. They're not incentivized and they're not practical for a human mind to try to adopt. And this is something that I'm concerned about, because when I mentioned earlier that it starts to look like a lot like religious fundamentalism, what I started to realize was that if you take this narrative that exists in the community, which is like, poker's dead, Nosebleeds is playing some sort of godlike strategy that nobody can really touch. And if you're going to get to Nosebleeds, you better study GTO and memorize it. And so what I noticed was that this isn't a discussion that goes into much detail. I've never heard two people sit down and talk about this at length and really deconstruct how true it is. And I have, a good enough amount of background on what goes on at Nosebleeds. Like, I've trained some Nosebleed players and I know they're using exploitative strategies. And so it doesn't feel right to me. I do believe that they're better at understanding equilibrium. I think this is an essential component. You've got to know theory. But I think it's a disservice for people to think that like playing perfect GTO is what goes on at Nosebleeds, and that's the type of thing you have to be training with the whole way in order to have a chance at getting to high stakes and Nosebleeds. So I started to basically look at how the narrative of the entire market is preventing guys from getting to high stakes. And what I saw was that we're not properly defining players and what they're doing, Nosebleed players and what they're doing. And until we take that guy off his undefined pedestal and say, well, let's quantify what he's doing, let's reverse engineer what he's doing, it's going to continue to look like that's just some god that we can't accomplish. We can't challenge or integrate whatever that godlike avatar is doing. And that's dangerous, because as soon as that happens, it's no different from people saying that the Bible is the religious text that cannot be challenged and everything in it is perfect and you'll never be able to change any of it or approach it. I see it being very similar to religious dogma. So
so you coach a lot of players right now. What are the most common issues you run into?
It's this one. It's the mindset narrative of the player believing that there is some fundamental difference between him and the high stakes player. That he is just fundamentally deficient on a level of self-worth. That there is a difference that he can't define that just makes the high stakes player or the Nosebleed player, and he doesn't have it. And worse than that, he'll never have it. Because even if he gets the right technical training, he's always going to have a belief system that separates him from positioning himself as an equal to the high stakes or Nosebleed player. And this is the type of thing that when you go deep into mindset, you realize it's more important than anything. And you really start to see it when you start giving the same methodology to a lot of different players, and you see different players have different amounts of success. I talk about this a lot with guys on the inside. I never really spoke about this publicly before, so this will be a sneak peek into what it was like to train Andrew Graham, who went to Nosebleeds in like a year's time, I think.
What's his screen name again?
His screen name is Oh Hey Cindy on PokerStars. And I trained Andrew early on when I started the detox company, and I didn't do many sessions with him at all. I think I did somewhere between 5 and 10 hours of sessions. And what I remember about Andrew was he listened more than any other student that I've ever trained. He asked very few questions, and I didn't know if he was even like focusing during the lessons. Like that's how strange it was to me that he was just so silent. during the lesson. But what I realized after was this was a kid that was absorbing, and he knew the value of actually listening to a lesson and really taking in the concepts of it and letting those concepts really reorganize how he thought about the game. And I think it's a testament to what good training looks like in terms of building an independent learner, because I can spoon feed someone the right answer all day, but if they're not learning how to think for themselves, and if they're not learning how to eventually scale on that methodology in a way that allows them to eventually create their own awesome strategies, which is what Andrew was doing, like as he progressed. If I can't make them independent, I'm failing them as a coach. And Andrew was a really great example of a student who just listened so well to the concepts that were being relayed and then took it and ran with it. And he didn't have the success barrier. I doubt that he did. I doubt that he looked at the game in a way that like thought that the nosebleed players were so much better and that this was so unattainable. I think he probably looked at it in a much more healthy way of, well, I trust myself and I'm trusting in the concepts and my understanding of the game. I'm going to go apply this in a logical way and see how it turns out. And so you look at his journey and it's like, okay, so a guy can go to nosebleeds in less than a year with relatively the same types of tools. I mean, sure, he did a lot of work on his own, I'm sure. And he got creative and probably has some revolutionary strategies that he's worked out, no doubt. But the starting ground is a player needs to have a mindset that is open to the possibility that he could end up at high stakes. This is the most bizarre thing that you find with a lot of these low stakes guys is subconsciously, they don't actually want to get there because it's the scariest place for them to be. And very few people are willing to admit this. And I think very few coaches are building awareness around it.
I recently read a post on Instagram from you. I think you talked about that. Do you mean people are self-sabotaging themselves? That they fear the success and they rather stay a loser or a bad player so they don't have to face the new challenges?
Very bizarre that this goes on, and it's not specific to poker. You'll see this in any industry you look at, where a person consciously behaves as though they want to get to the top. They'll tell you all day, like, my goal is to get to the top, but their actions don't map to it, and their subconscious dialogue doesn't believe it, and more directly, it doesn't want it. And what you start to realize, if you go deep with someone, and these are the students that I love the most at this stage in my career, is the type of guy who will go to a deeply uncomfortable place with analyzing his core beliefs with me. And you start to get into this deep line of questioning where it's very direct. Guys who like my blogs will like this type of belief work, because when I speak in blogs, it's very direct, short sentences, to the point. And when you're engaging someone in this type of inquiry, it's very direct. What are you afraid of here? And what happens if that happens? And then what? And what are you really afraid of if that happens? And so you go down the line, you keep checkmating them until they finally have to say something like, I feel deeply unworthy. That's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of having it be confirmed that I'm actually unworthy. You get to places like this, like 80% of the guys have some sort of unworthiness thing going on. And I think if we're going to be completely honest, we all have some sort of unworthiness thing going on. But whether or not it's going to keep you from high stakes, you know, there's degrees of believing yourself to be unworthy, and there's zones where people feel unworthy. So I love taking it really deep with someone.
If you have a student and it shows up, he's self-sabotaging himself, you get to the answer, he doesn't feel worthy enough. How do you tackle that problem?
Okay, so let's pretend that's the core belief. I am unable, or I'm unworthy. What starts to happen when you discover the core belief is a lot starts to make sense. Because if you have a core belief that you're unable or unworthy of getting to high stakes or success, let's just keep it broad because I know you have different viewers who aren't just poker players. What the mind will do is it will bury that belief and start to compensate or resist it at all costs. So it will try to make the belief not true by not looking at it, avoiding it, and resisting it intensely. And the way that tries to resist it is to basically prove it wrong. So you see a lot of guys, and this was the thing that I was doing. I was like so good at this. It's such a bad thing to be good at, but like my early career was me trying to prove this belief wrong in every way possible and exerting massive amounts of energy to try to prove myself, not realizing that my subconscious was controlling my actions, and that what was happening every time was that me trying to prove the belief that I'm unworthy wrong was actually proving it right. And this is very meta. And so I want people not to try to understand this as conceptually as they're used to. But if you're trying to prove a belief wrong, you're actually energizing that you believe it to be true. And if you believe that to be true, that will sabotage your performance at every step of the way in ways that you're not aware of. And this is what people really don't like to hear.
That's kind of like the Tony Robbins thing where he said, when you drive the car and you say, I don't want to hit the wall, I don't want to hit the wall, and then you're hitting the wall, and
it doesn't make sense. And so this is what's really, it doesn't seem to make sense when it's happening to you. And that's why there's a lot of defense mechanisms that go up when you talk about core beliefs. Like, for someone to realize that they've actually been sabotaging all along on a subconscious level is a very painful discovery, because it feels like years wasted. You feel stupid. There's a lot of self-criticism and guilt that swoops in. And you also feel just lost, because you're like, well, can I even trust myself again? I didn't even know that these things were operating on a really deep level. And you see this in all types of situations. You see it with an example like you just gave. You see it with the partner who gets abused and continues to find abusive relationships. It's because there's a deep core belief that believes this is what I am deserving of. And I never understood it either. I remember hearing these types of examples earlier on and saying like, well, that doesn't make any sense. If she knew that she was being abused, she wouldn't go and pick a new partner that abused her. If the player knew he was punting off stacks, he wouldn't continue to self-sabotage. But what started to make it so clear to me was that when you see that the thing that they're more afraid of is getting to high stakes or getting the partner that really loves them, that's actually the deepest fear. And this is what's so bizarre, is when you take it to that meta level, you see, well, they were getting what they wanted all along. It was logical. It was rational, at least. It may not be ultimately logical. It may be doing something that creates more pain for them, but it actually is rational. The dots connect in the way their mind is sort of lining things up. And so this is what I'm so interested in with the small stakes player who sabotages against high stakes, is that if we get right to the bottom of it, his deepest fear is what would happen if he was worthy of high stakes. He resists this at all costs, because there's such a transformation that would have to occur in the way that he identifies with himself. There's such a feeling that there would be a loss of control or an overwhelming pressure that would be put on him if he actually established himself at that rank, that the mind does this weird knee-jerk reaction thing where it just resists that reality at all costs. It doesn't even want to investigate. It's just, no, that's not for me. And it buries it back into reinforcing the subconscious belief, which is, I'm just unworthy. And this is how it is, because it's safer. It's actually safer for him to be a struggling, self-sabotaging small stakes player than to get to the top. And this is the thing that's really, it has me fascinated beyond any level of excitement I've been in with anything strategy-wise in the game. It's like, oh, so it's way, way more macro, and it has way more to do with mindset than we ever thought. And I was talking about this back in 2017 when me and Elliot were doing podcasts, and I made an Instagram post. I said, 2018 is going to be the mental revolution. And I thought I was just talking about it on the level of like, teach people how not to tilt using technical strategies. It's way deeper. It's so subconscious.
One strategy how to uncover these beliefs is, for example, hypnotherapy. I had Elliot on last episode. Does every one of your students, every one of your students, do they have a mental coach? Do they use a mental coach?
We used to have everybody work with Elliot until he sort of went a different path, and now he works with very, very elite clients. What we do now is we tried to create our own mental game module. I've got a series of execs that all have different roles in trying to enhance the back end content that we use for the CFP training for our students. Specifically, I work with an instructor whose name is Matt Hunt. We do a lot of this mindset stuff together. We're so fascinated by how paradigms work and how success barriers work. And what we've done is we created a mental module so that when our guys come into the CFP training course, when they first get their contract, they're entering into Division 1. There's 4 divisions. Division 1 is small stakes through Division 2. Division 3 is mid stakes, and then Division 4 is high stakes. When they come into Division 1, they get released a certain amount of mindset content. And the way me and Matt have designed it is that the Division 1 player is getting what the Division 1 player needs in terms of mindset training. And then we're releasing mindset videos as they progress in stakes in a way that we feel is relevant for the types of challenges that player is going through at that time. So we've worked with enough guys to see that, okay, usually when a guy hits Division 2, these are the types of problems they tend to have. Let's release this mindset module right when the guy hits Division 2. So timing is what we're working on now. And when you have a pretty large sample of players that you're training, when you've seen a lot of case studies, you start to get better at delivering the right lesson at the right time. And that's really what I'm focused on.
How many players do you have? Are in your project right now?
Currently, we are contracting around 30. We worked with 10 to 15 for a while. 2018 was a very important year of learning how to get our structures right. The company achieved a lot of new balance in terms of learning how to allow more autonomy for the player to do his own thing and to have his own sense of strategy and to be creative while still making sure that they're not deviating too far from the system strategy. So it was about finding this balance where the player felt like he was in control of what he was doing, so it was still his career and that he wasn't just executing this blind strategy, while still making sure that he was doing things that were logical and not getting too far off the beaten path with strategy creation, I guess. So we learned a lot this year. We created a lot of really solid structures, and then 2019 is going to be the year of scaling for us, where we're really happy finally with the executive team that we have in place and the structure that we use to funnel guys through to high stakes. And so we'll be taking on about 10 new players a month on average, I think, for the next 6 months, up until the goal is to get to 100 and then reassess and see if we can continue on from there.
You did one crazy thing to prove that your system is working. I think you contracted 10 losing players. Is that correct? And you tried to turn them into winning players?
We did. So this was I look back on this thinking this might have been a mistake. And don't get me wrong, like the relationships I've seen formed from a number of these losing players that are still with me today, they're basically the backbone of the team, I would say. It's like nothing I've ever seen in terms of the loyalty and friendship they have toward each other, and just the trust that exists because everybody sort of put their life on the line almost to join this project. We all went to Athens on a trip. Well, the guys that showed up ended up being, I think there was like 10 or 11 in this initial wave of losers only. 5 or 6 of them went the distance. And these happened to be the guys that showed up on this Athens trip that I took. And the interesting thing about it was that Poker Masters was coming out at the time. And I said, hey guys, there's this opportunity. At the time, they were still all losing micros players. I said, we spent a week together and I really liked the connection that all of these guys had. And by the end of the week, I said, look, I want to try this thing. I want to put you guys on the Poker Masters site as a joint stake, meaning that we had a profit goal of 200,000 USD and they tracked profits and losses as a team.
So the goal was 200,000 winnings for the team?
For the team, for the 5 of them. And I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, because you guys are all losing micros players, we're going to have an intense training period. We had been training up until that Athens trip for like 4 or 5 months. And I was relatively satisfied with where they were at. I had no idea if they could beat, I didn't believe they could beat 200 NL on like Poker Stars. But they were slight winners at 50 NL on Stars, most of them. And so I said, look, we got an opportunity here. I've never seen games this soft. And I don't know how long it's going to be around, but I want to do it with you guys if you want to do it with me. And I'll put myself on the line here because it was more than I can afford at the time. I was basically investing like 100,000 into players that I just didn't even know if they could produce winnings. I had no real proof. We had mostly just done preliminary training. But I was all in on just the energy of this group. I saw that they wanted it. I sensed myself in them in a way. And I know that's cliche to say, but like the ambition was there. And I thought, let's try this where we create this team dynamic where it's sort of no man left behind. If one guy is losing, that guy brings the whole team down because it's a group stake. It's $200K. And as soon as the team gets there, it doesn't really matter who made the money. You guys all split the profits.
So the 200K, there was no time limit on it?
Well, no, it was basically a $200,000 profit goal. We didn't know how long we had to make it. No time limit. But once they hit the 200K, they would split winnings evenly no matter who made the money. And so it was this very team-oriented dynamic that brought them so close together. And it was an experiment on my behalf. And I still joke to this day that I wonder if we actually even accomplished all that much technically with that group. I wonder if it was just the frame of it all. I wonder if it was that they had something bigger to play for that we created. That was the success of that program, because they did hit profit goal within 6 months. 2 of those guys even started playing high stakes on Poker Masters, and it was just this wild rush. It was like the golden years of the company, because like shortly after that, collusion set in and we got hit pretty hard by it on Poker Masters, and the mindset of the team was affected pretty deeply by it. And so 2018 was about recovering for us. It was about building structures because we recognized we were overextended. I wouldn't take it back, I don't think. We did such good results from the Poker Masters opportunity, but what we didn't know was like how to pull back and recover from it. We were overextended. We had guys playing high stakes that were on downswings now and needed time to recover mentally. And we should have been paying more attention, and we should have been paying more attention to the state of the games. We weren't prepared in a lot of ways. And so we learned some valuable lessons. But 2018, we took it really slow and we learned a lot. I feel like the executive team got punched in the face 18 different times over the course of 2018 with things that we just didn't expect. But having weathered that storm, I think we're definitely stronger than ever in terms of knowing how to not overextend the type of company that we run. And I feel like we understand the needs of the player and what creates a player's ability to embody his potential. I think they're different things. I think everybody has a certain amount of potential. Some players have higher potential than others. I don't want to say that that's not true. There is a such thing as a high performer and a low performer. And the low performer, if it's in his DNA and his base mindset, he will never become a high performer. I hate to say this. People hate when I say this, but I've seen it happen enough that if you do not have the level of ambition and self-respect and dedication, it's all of these things. It's like it has to be in your blood almost.
So you think it's only learnable to a degree?
To an extent, but the beauty of this is that poker is trainable enough, especially as the methodologies get more accurate and efficient. And this is where I come in as sort of like the promise I made to myself that I want to build the most accurate, efficient bridge ever, so that even the low performer could potentially play high stakes. That would be quite a feat, I think. And it would be more of a reflection of how soft the industry was than anything else. Or, maybe a combination of how soft the industry is and how accurate the methodology is. But what I have come to realize, and I hesitate to say this because I never want someone to become defeated by hearing this and say, well, fuck, I knew I was a low performer all along, and now Nick has just confirmed it. I'm never going to play high stakes. This is not what I'm saying. If you're putting yourself in a low performance box, it may just be because you don't have the inspiration yet, or you have some perspective that needs to get shifted. Maybe you do have this ambition, you're just not aware of it yet. But what I have seen is that there is a difference between different types of people. And I think it goes deeper than even belief systems sometimes. It's, are you built for pressure? I think that's actually what it is. Are you built to handle a lot of pressure? Because that's what it's going to take to be able to overcome the types of belief systems that limit a player from getting to high stakes and beyond.
Well, I would be interested in what is the thing you enjoy most about the coaching, and what are the core principles of your company, when you teach your students?
Core values. excessive ownership, humility, transparency. Those are the top three for me. What I would say from working with so many types of people, the thing that I'm always looking for is someone available to the truth. Are they receptive to feedback? This is actually one of the biggest things. How do they receive critical feedback? And it's taught me so much about how to give feedback. My imbalance as a coach was, and still is, I would say, to give feedback that's just too frank, especially as a CEO and balancing a lot of different things. Time is my biggest asset. So if I have to give someone advice, I have a tendency to say it in the simplest, most direct way because it saves the most time. And I know that's how I like to receive feedback, and I can respect it because I have a reservoir of empathy for the CEO. I understand when people don't have the time to sit down and baby you through stuff. And I also understand that it doesn't really help a lot of time if somebody holds your hand. But the right way is a balance between these two. And so a lot of the work I do is with strategic advisors who have tests. One of the things we work with is the Harrison assessment test. It is a job suitability assessment that is probably one of the most widely renowned in the world. And what it does is it basically ranks you on all of these preferences. There's no wrong answer, but you just sort preferences. So it'll give you like 8 things that you prefer. Do you want to be in charge? Do you like working outside? Like it's all this random shit. And you stack rank it. And you do it a lot of different times. And then by the end, it throws it in its algorithm and it comes up with all of these results basically that show you where you land as suitability for a CEO. And the cool thing, I was excited to hear that a year ago I took this test and my suitability for CEO was at like a 66%, which is just in the quadrant of like suitable for the position. And working with this team for the last year and really balancing myself in my communication, I think that's been my main improvement is being able to be diplomatic and frank in balance and being able to achieve the result while exhibiting empathy. And so I retook this test recently and now I'm at an 88%. And I don't think it's a coincidence because I see the results in the way I'm communicating and the way I'm dealing with problem solving. I have more awareness over how something's going to be interpreted by someone who's in a certain paradigm. And this is the real skill set. I would say if we're solving problems in poker, this is the real problem that needs to get solved before someone moves on to the next lesson. We're going to all be able to do much bigger, better things in life if we learn how to connect to people who are operating from different paradigms and to really change your communication so that in a lot of ways it almost feels like I don't have a stable personality anymore. And I see that as a good thing because depending if I'm talking to student X, Y, or Z, I might use a completely different method of language, tonality, to convey what I'm trying to get across. And that has everything to do with what the student is requesting on a subconscious, energetic, vibrational level almost. Not to get too woo-woo into this, but it is very, very energetic. Good coaching, good receptive methodological transmission is as much about connecting to the student in his own language on his own emotional scale as it is being right. And so this is the real thing. Maybe this is the right thing to end on, is that it doesn't matter if you're right, because being right is such a limited way of looking at something. You can be right in a logical sense, and 9 out of 10 people in the room might not know what you're talking about. You can be right and deliver the information in a completely insensitive way, and people who are defensive are going to reject it because you don't have their trust yet. So it's not about having the best information. It's about having the best information and figuring out how to convey that information to many, many different types of people who are all receiving the learning process in a different way.
What I realized for myself, when I understood that people are different and you have to talk differently to people, I got better to talking to myself, like, because the way we treat other people, we have to also take care how we treat ourselves and how we talk to ourselves.
This is extremely perceptive of you because it really shows what your imbalance might be towards your own self-talk. The way that you talk yourself to, the way you speak to yourself the most probably indicates the imbalance that you have, and you could use more of the other type of self-talk. For me, for instance, I'm too self-critical, and knowing this about myself, it makes sense that my native way of communicating with someone is to be overly frank, way to the point, almost insensitive. And so a lot of my personal journey has been about, okay, if I can become more self-accepting, then suddenly I might not project as much onto another person when I'm trying to train them a lesson. And you see that like most of the times where you're being viewed as insensitive by someone, not always, but a lot of the times, it's because you're seeing a trait in them that you wouldn't want to see in yourself. And so that's the thing you're actually being critical of. And this is what's called projection. And it's one of the fiercest catalysts as a teacher, is you're constantly being mirrored by your students. Your students are always showing you, your students are showing you whether or not your intention is completely pure and accurate, or whether or not they're doing something that makes you remember something that you did that you didn't like about yourself, or some goal that you had that you never completed, or something that you quit. It's all of this. And so I think you talk about like who learns more, the teacher or the student. I think a good teacher, a humble teacher, a receptive teacher who really keeps his ear to the ground to what his students are saying. And in our company, one of the biggest things is we really push guys to give feedback. And then we have an executive team that tries to objectively analyze, is this feedback that is exposing an imbalance in the executives, or is it the projection of the student's belief system? And the more intelligent minds you have looking at that from an unbiased place, which is always the hardest thing, because, you know, we would like to think our executive team is unbiased, but we still obviously have our biases. The more you can look at the feedback that you're getting and say, okay, yes, this part's true, but this part comes from that guy's bias, so we need to throw that out. This is how you scale very quickly, and you accelerate into more and more balanced structures and systems. So it's been what we've been working on. Now our systems, I think, are quite balanced in terms of how we deal with players and the structures that we put them through. But maybe 2 years, I'll talk with you again and I'll say that was a joke what we had in 2018, and we're much better now. In fact, I hope I say that.
Okay, Nick, we're close to 1 hour. I enjoyed very much talking to you. I hope we can do it again, maybe earlier than 2 years. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking the time. Maybe you can where can people find you?
Well, we're filming a vlog here for the first time. So we're going to make we're going to make some decent noise on YouTube coming in late December. So look for us there. I'm not sure when you're releasing this, but it'll be around mid to late December when our first episodes go out for the vlog. And then other than that, find me on Instagram, Pokerdetox on Instagram. It's where I do most of my thought-provoking stuff. And then our website, pokerdetox.com. If you're interested in CFP, we take new applicants every month at this point. So by all means, take a shot.
One more question.
Sure.
Because I talked with Elliot about Instagram. Do you use Instagram personally?
You mean on my Pokerdetox account?
Because the big issue is obviously wasting too much time on social media.
Yeah.
Do you use it for your personal life, or do you just delete it?
I don't have a personal account right now. I changed my account to the Pokerdetox company account, and that was an attempt to do what you're saying, prevent myself from just using it too much personally. So I don't currently have a personal account. I see benefits and drawbacks to it. When I'm just cruising something that I know is a waste of time, I try to catch myself. But we all do it in unhealthy ways. I think that the best thing that you can do is if you're gonna go through your Instagram, listen to what's going on, and don't do it in a judgmental way, because maybe this is more relevant for me because I'm always looking for new methodology and always trying to see where the community is at. But the community will tell you what the problem is, and whether or not you're someone who's a competitor or whether or not you're someone who's trying to build a bridge toward a more cooperative, non-zero sum paradigm, exactly how the market thinks. And if you're in a market, you should be interested in that. So spend your time as a poker player on Instagram looking at what other poker players say, and don't just do it like, well, this guy thinks that's so stupid. Look at all of this noise. It's like, oh, look at all of this noise. That means these people are caught in these belief systems. How can I use that to my advantage if I'm still competing? Or how can I create a cooperative environment if I'm doing something like coaching to try to draw people out? See, my position, I'm doing both, which is really bizarre because I'm running a CFP group that's cutthroat competition trying to exploit the market. But then the other side of my journey is, how can I help the market come out of this collective unconsciousness that they're in? And so I feel like I win either way. If nobody wants to listen to me, my CFP team's going to crush you all. If everybody wants to listen to me, then we all elevate the consciousness and we can move to another paradigm where we're all solving different, better, more important problems. So that's where I'm at.
Let's end with that. Thank you, Nick, for taking the time. It was awesome listening to you. And thank you all the guys who listened to the podcast. Thank you very much. That was episode 3.